Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this month's webinar, June 2016, entitled, It's Media Kit Time, or Is It? So a very popular topic from last year. We're kind of refreshing it up a little bit for this year. And I'm glad you can join us here in the middle of a beautiful summer day here in Minnesota. Our goal for today in the next 40 minutes or so is to walk through a discussion a little bit about media kits. We have a couple of interactive polls that I'm going to ask you guys to participate in. So if you don't mind taking the time when we get to them, I would appreciate it. The GoToMeeting dialog box will give you the area to put in questions that you may have along the way that I can try to get to. It'll be where you can answer the poll questions and put in any commentary that you have along the way. We do record these every month because a lot of folks download them and share them with other people and with their groups. So certainly afterwards when you get the follow-up, you're welcome to request the download of the recording. And in addition, we have a handout that we'll be referencing here that you can also request to help you guys as you're sitting down and going through your kits. So without further ado, let's get going. So my name is Brett Kierstead. Again, I'm Senior Vice President of Sales for Knowledge Marketing. For those of you who are new to our webinars or to our brand, we focus on providing services and technologies into publishers, media companies, associations, and event providers. We focus on building and modifying, unifying audience data. We have a full-service email platform. We have circulation management services for traditional subscriber-based products. We help capture behavioral marketing and behavioral information and with reporting around all that data, as well as we spend a lot of time and energy focused on helping media sales and marketing strategy. So our background is focused in that area. We have some great customers, and these are the folks that we draw a lot of our stories from, where we get our ideas, where we learn from what works and what doesn't work and the different challenges that they had. So by focusing on you guys, your vertical market, the types of customers and the way you guys make money and the tools that you use, this webinar series continues to provide people hopefully with some ideas. So today's focus is media kits. All right, so we're going to start with a real simple poll, and I'm going to launch this poll for you guys right now so you can answer the questions if you will. It's a pretty straightforward question. You can only provide one answer. The number one job of your media kit, you can't say all the above, is which of the following? Is it one, to provide a framework for sales for the process? Number two, do you just do it to make your publishers happy? Number three, do you satisfy agency RFP requests so you have something to give them? Is it to outline your pricing and style guidelines, or is there some other reason? If there's something else, if you didn't mind, submit it into GoToMeeting under the questions box is fine. Why do you even do it? When you think about our purpose of this, creating a media kit and making it available, the number one reason is what? Okay, so I'll give you another 30 seconds. You can only pick one. All right, a few more seconds. Most of the people are voted. Okay, we'll close it out. So I'll share the results with you. I'm very happy to say that very few people put B. In other words, you're not just doing it to make someone happy. It's interesting that the first one is to provide a framework for the sales process, right, as a tool to help you guys frame out the sales process. And we'll talk about whether that's a good idea or not, but certainly that has the predominance of the answers. C and D, obviously some people do it for agencies. You've got to. They ask for it. You want to do it, or RFPs. So it's kind of a necessary tool. And then D is to outline pricing and style guide. It's interesting that we, even in this small sample size, we have a mix, meaning there's not a clear number one. I mean, there's a clear number one, at least in terms of A being the number one area, but it's not that everybody has consensus on exactly why you do it. So it's good results. There were a couple of add-ins. One of them was to position the range of services that we can provide clients. So, really like an overview of the company and their services and capabilities. I like that one. Outlining audience, editorial, schedules, brand story, pricing, and specs. Those are some examples that are in there. And we're going to talk about each one of those, but it's really an interesting perspective and answer, so I appreciate that. Okay, so let's get back to our presentation. So let's talk a little bit about the background. So I've looked at, you know, again, we have a lot of clients, and I've tried to do some research and look up various different kits that I either get access to, or I've seen, or we buy from, or customers, or even like in the case of Facebook, even though it may not be a traditional media kit, at least in terms of how we think of it, it still represents how they present their offering. You know, what is it? If you're going to advertise with them, what does their look like? What capabilities they have? So not just media kit in the most traditional sense of a downloadable PDF, but just think about the way you frame up who you are and the opportunity. So I looked at a lot of these different ones, and over the past year or so at various different times, and just so you understand the framework of where I've been coming from. Typically, they all have the same thing. A lot of them are templatized. They have, you know, your company background. Here's who we are. Our mission statement is to be wonderful. Like you guys say, talk about your brands and products and services. There's typically information in there about your data, your audience. We'll talk a little bit about different ways people are positioning that. There's potentially audit information if that's a necessary component. Most of them have some kind of a calendar to it. Pricing is almost always in there in some form or fashion, but we'll talk a little bit about how people are looking at it a little bit differently. Some of it is gated. In other words, some of you have like a gate in front of it on your website. You know, you have to request it from somebody, or you have to enter some information. And then media format-wise, most of them historically that I've looked at are lead with a PDF type version, but more and more are becoming more interactive, requiring more of an online engagement experience, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So there's a framework for them. I think you guys all understand it. Interestingly, I always joke about this. If you look at 125 years ago, J. Walter Thompson had their little media kit page. That significant percentage of what's on that page is exactly the framework for how a lot of media kits are today. So it talks about some kind of selling proposition. It talks about their products and magazines. It has some kind of fluffy speak. It talks about pricing. So, you know, as a general framework, I mean, we could argue that the media itself, you know, in other words, we have fancy PDFs now and some cooler stuff, but I'm not sure we have 100% evolved in every case of how this tool is used, but certainly we're at a crossroads because from a company perspective, we have so much more to offer than just magazines, and the selling process is significantly more complicated. So here's what I mean by that. You know, I think when I talk to a lot of salespeople, and we do a lot of sales training, and we work with a lot of media salespeople, you know, historically, when time and space was the way that you sold your media, it used to be in a print magazine, then it became a banner ad on a website, or placement here and there, or a booth. When you're in a pure time and space selling, that framework of a media kit makes a lot of sense, because what people are assessing you for is looking at a product or a set of products that they want to have a placement in for a particular timeline in a particular media. So the media kit supports that type of selling when someone is either picking from products or purchasing things in a fairly straightforward manner, almost off a pick list, and they're understanding how much visibility do I get, what frequency, you know, what's the parameters of it, what's the rate. It's fairly straightforward. It's very transactional, so it makes a lot of sense. You know, but unfortunately, I think, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, there's a lot of changes going on. If you talk to media salespeople, there's a lot of dynamics that are going on. You know, the people that are buying media are different. It's not the traditional magazine salesperson. You know, you're competing against the Facebooks and LinkedIn and other sources for advertising money and social. You guys yourself have a bunch of new services and technologies. Your revenue mix is changing. From a rep perspective, you maybe have a different quota mix where you're charged or commissioned at a certain rate for a certain type of product or certain types of accounts. You know, the conversations that you're having are very different, and the skills are different. So when we look at legacy tools, Media Kit being a legacy tool, we have to ask ourselves, how does it fit within the framework of what we're doing today? 55% of you said that the Media Kit provides the framework for your sales process. So I'd ask yourself, if your sales process has changed, meaning who you sell and who buys is different, how can you actually keep your Media Kit the same? It really wouldn't make sense. So that's I'm glad you're here. Hopefully you'll see the disconnect or the corrections that need to be made. Because again, a lot of people are really focused on moving away from a transactional sale into a solution sale. You know, whether they're following like the Challenger sale, these different books. What you guys hit on, which is fascinating, what you really need to think about is, according to most complex sales, in other words, the way you guys are trying to sell media today, if you look at CEB, they do this study that say 57% of the customer's process for buying, their decision process for buying, is complete before they actually contact the supplier, whether that be through an RFP or whether that be through a rep interaction, a first meeting. So they've done, and we all understand this, they've done their homework. They've looked around at different tools, they've looked at your website, they've looked at your different materials, they've read your emails and your collateral, and that material supports how you want to sell. And if your media kit is your #1 educator, if you will, as many of you are contemplating, some of you even said to outline our capabilities and what we present, then you had better make sure it's tight and precise and in alignment with how you sell and what you're trying to do, or else you're really creating a disconnect. So, I mean, I think you guys are thinking right, and if the media kit is going to be the lead tool in education, then it better be aligned with how you're trying to position yourselves. Okay, I had a great quote. I was talking to a group publisher the other day, and we were talking about sales, and here was his quote. He said, "No media sales professional today worth their salt relies on rate cards, editorial calendars, and media kits as a sales tool with our strategic clients and prospects." Okay, so whether or not you think it's that extreme of a statement, to me the word that jumps out is relies on. I mean, I do agree, and I think we'll talk about today, that editorial calendars, rates, pricing, media kits are an essential part of it. It's a communication tool, it might be an education tool, but I think the word reliance, that this is how I sell off of, is maybe fine in a very transactional sale, but in a complex sale with a strategic account, you're really pushing that tool to the side and focusing on a different way of selling. So again, I think my conclusion that I would say that we'll talk a little bit about today is, yes, the media kit continues to be a part of your arsenal. It continues to play a role in your marketing and sales efforts, but its purpose, the construct of it, the use cases are definitely changing. Okay, so if we thought the media kit was dead, we could end this webinar now, but I do think that it continues to be a useful tool for you guys. And really what we want to do in the rest of this webinar in the next half hour or so is focus on these different issues. Do we know its purpose? Do we understand its construct? Do we understand the use cases? And then maybe give you guys some ideas to work from. Okay, so let's keep going. Here's some things to think about. So I mentioned before that we have a follow along, although I'm not going in order here, so it really isn't exactly a follow along, but there's a kit, a tip sheet that we can download if you're interested off our website. I'm sure in the link we'll reference to it. That can just give you some questions to ask yourself. Last time when I talked with customers about media kit planning, they use this as a way to just ask themselves some questions. Again, if you're just going to mail in your media kit from last year, update your pricing rates, and republish it, don't waste your time. But if you're really trying to look at this as a little bit different and kind of take a step back, then these are some good, kind of self-assessment questions that you can go through and ask yourself about whether or not what you're doing is effective or not. So we'll use some of these as the framework for the rest of today as an example. Okay, so let's talk about audience and targeting. One of the things that we as a publishing and media company rely on is our audience, and whatever that means. And also secondarily, the ability of us to do targeting, so how we kind of look at specific areas. So I find it interesting when you look at the way people represent their audiences, there's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of questions. Some people insist on representing it as a number. Some people want to focus on a large number. Some people want to focus on numbers within a specific product. They might say, oh, this product A has 50,000 people. Product B has 30, digital product B has X number of visitors, etc. And other people choose to do it in more of a total reach manner. Some people look at the net amount. So there's a lot of inconsistency that I see in here. What I try to do, or what I see that is valuable, is instead of thinking about the numbers themselves, instead of just purely thinking about audience, think about what the representation of it means in a broader sense. In other words, the audience that you have, that you're presenting through your media kit as a representation of your company, is more than just the consolidated number of individuals across your products. In other words, if you have 50,000 here, 40,000 there, 80,000 there, 20,000 there, and you combine them all together and you have 100,000, well, just saying that you have 100,000 names, if that's the case, really doesn't present your audience as something other than a number or a consolidation of products. So what people try to do, and I like to see, and I think is more compelling, is positioning your audience collectively as a resource across an industry. Okay, so one of our customers is a company out of the Chicago area called TMB Publishing, and they reworked their media kit last year and really focused on representing their company as a source for unified data and unified audience within a particular industry. So again, it's not just the numbers itself, it's what the collection of those people mean to the industries that they serve. So they'll say we're the #1 brands for unified marketing, we have these names, it's a resource, it's available for unique decision makers, they're the #1 audience leader, and they position themselves as a unified marketing platform and a technology and an audience that serves an industry rather than just purely an individual collection of named products with a certain number of people. So again, when you guys think about audience and you take a step back and you reread your media kit, ask yourself, do you bind together in any of your messaging about your audience something other than a sum of just the numbers themselves, but rather something bigger than that? The #1 source, the leading resource, the top this, the key source of information, insight, etc. Something about the industry that your audience represents, not just the numbers itself. So I think it's a good exercise. It just tends to separate you from just purely being a collection of numbers that someone can poke holes in. Okay, so that's audience. That's a good example of something I think does a better job of creating a visual around the audience itself. And the reason why it become a challenge is here's an example of one where, I see a lot of these kind of standard Venn diagrams, So I would ask myself, if I really wanted to take a critical look at this, I would say, well, first of all, are you really saying that the overlap between all of these is that little tiny black dot? I mean, are we really sure that across all of our different multiple product engines, we only have the smallest of small people that engage us across media? I mean, I'm sure that's not what is trying to be represented here, but people who just casually throw this out as if this is a very compelling graphic, it doesn't really tell the story about what you're trying to do. So you got to make sure that when you're doing these kinds of visuals and you're talking about integrated audience, you're talking about engagement, you explain more of the relationships between them, and if you're going to represent them visually, do so in a way that's more clever than just simply your kind of 4 concentric circles with a small overlap that, again, if I wanted to, I could draw all the wrong conclusions from. Okay, now, so that's one, audience. So that's one to think about. Spend a lot of time thinking about that. Next up is prices, okay? Prices in your media kit. So here's poll number 2. I trust that you'll like this one. I can't wait to see the results of this question. Okay, so you guys have prices in your media kit. You have 3 choices here. When you think about what happens in the end, number 1, do you almost always or always actually charge and get what you say in your media kit prices? Okay. Number 2, would you argue that at best it's guidelines, or C, we've taken them out? There's no prices in there anymore. So awesome. We say it's going to be $1,000. It's $1,000. Or we say it's $1,000, but it probably won't be. Or C, we're not going to tell you what the prices are at all. Okay. A few more seconds. A couple more votes and we'll be good. This one's funny. You guys will like this one. Okay, let's close it and share it. So, according to the results, only 22% of you actually get, in your opinion, whether that's facts or opinions, your perception, exactly what your prices are, close to the prices in there. 72% of you, so the overwhelming majority, get something, I'm assuming, less or different, potentially. It doesn't always have to be less, but it could be different in terms of its combinations. And then 7% of you, it's very exciting. I'd love to talk to those people, don't have them in there anymore. So that's a fun one to talk about, and we'll discuss that a little bit more. Well, my contention would be to ask you, if you're not going to hold steady on your price, why publish them? Because generally speaking, what most people would find is that you've probably capped yourself, in many cases, at a particular top-end price because people are going to expect that you'll negotiate down. Or, even worse, they've kind of pigeonholed you into looking at a particular set of products in their individuality. In other words, I'm not thinking about products in relation to other products or products in relation to a campaign. I'm really assessing whether something is worth $1,000 or whatever it may be in its unit basis. Because most of you tell me, and what I see is everybody's trying to go towards more integrated proposals. You want to sell a bundle of products and services. You want to sell campaign-oriented programs. And if you're going to do that, it's almost inevitable that, number one, you're going to end up bundling in multiple services and leading with different areas. And two, you're also going to have the desire to present to them something more custom. In negotiation, a lot of times they'll tell you whoever throws out the first price loses, as a traditional technical negotiation technique, and you're already starting from a losing position by having this strategy. Now, I don't always say that's true. Sometimes it's true, but over many, many permutations, that's typically not a recommended negotiation strategy, is to be the first one to bring out price before you've had time to have a conversation about value. And how you represent them sometimes is in the context of a product. Sometimes they're in the context of a very, very tight nomenclature about what costs look like, whether it's CPM or gross or these numbers. It's very language specific. Some people put it in the appendix, some people put it in the middle. I mean, it really varies all over the place, but I mean, the general premise that I always ask is a couple of different problems with pricing. Number one, everybody says they want to do custom programs. And I don't just mean custom media, but I mean custom programs. So if you publish pricing and you do so in both a product and a rate, how are you actually representing clearly your ability to work with them as an individual advertiser to create a custom proposal? I kind of made the joke when I was thinking about it. I'm like, here, you're like it's the McPick 2 of advertising. Well, we've got all these things, and for $2, pick your banner ad, your rate, and your ice cream cone. I mean, I just think if you really want to position yourself as a strategic partner, that pricing is probably not going to hold up. Now, it might be necessary and important in a non-strategic sale. In a transaction-oriented sale like an RFP request where they want to look at some things very specifically, and that's why I'm saying it's not necessarily a yes or no proposition, but understand the ramifications of what happens when you present that way. It does position you in somewhat, I mean, and I know this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, as the McPick 2, The next one I would ask you is, a lot of you are trying to sell quality over quantity, okay? So there's a value of the most, let's just say, instead of 50,000 names, generic names on a list, like a really pure play CPM, what if your strategy is to sell, let's say, the 1,000 most highly engaged, highly strategic, highly qualified, critical leads among that 50,000 names? So if you're going to publish pricing of something that, let's say, is 50,000 names versus 1,000 names, how do you think that you're going to propose in a visual pricing mechanism within a rate card without conversation the value of targeting and segmentation for pricing? It's really a conundrum. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's a very difficult position to say, well, for 50,000 non-qualified names or less qualified names, it's $1 per CPM. But if you really want the people that are interested, it's going to be $80 a CPM. So you have a very difficult conversation presenting quality over quantity if you're going to publish pricing in that type of manner. So anyway, it's just something to think about whether or not it's right or wrong. whether there's not multiple use cases. My only recommendation is to assess it and ask your salespeople and ask your folks what is the appropriate method to do it. Okay? So that's pricing. Another one is words matter. I think, again, sometimes I think, we want to produce the media kit. It's a labor of love, or maybe not, and we forget that if we want people to read it, the context of what we say is representative of the brand. Again, several of you have said, "Oh, this represents our brand. It's a marketing piece. It's visual." But yet, I would look through and I'm like, God, are they sure? Has somebody really checked some of these things in detail? So we talked about this before. There's a lot of buzzwords that are overused about how you describe yourself. Leader, leading, best, top, unique, great. And if you go through and assess your marketing, your media kit, and ask yourself how many times you use that, some of you might be mortified. But like, here's an example of a couple. So, here's one. One of our goals is to be leadership-centric. We focus on leadership in a fast-changing with strategic strategy. It's like they start to lose, as we all know. We're content creators. A lot of you are editorial, or you think like editors. You got to remember that, even in something as marketing-oriented as a media kit, you have to self-assess and ask yourself, are the words that you're saying matter? And another thing that I noticed too is a lot of you are continuing to use what I would call legacy words. Reader engagement, subscriber. Everybody in your database is not just a reader or a subscriber. They may be an attendee. They may be, they may download. They don't necessarily have to be the most traditional words. You really make yourself sound like an old school media publisher when you use these kinds of words. So, words like audience engagement or contextual or behavioral, these are the kinds of words that you really want to emphasize, or our engaged audience member, our multi-channel audience member, or, the attendee, or things like that. These are words that, expand beyond these traditional legacy words that you use. Blast is another one. I can't tell you how many times I see we're blasting people still. But again, it creates a connotation about how you are as an advertiser to the people that you're trying to serve. Okay, again, elevated language, just check your language in some of these. I'm good friends with the friends at Folio. We advertise with them, so I'm not, I talked to them a little bit about it, but this is an example from last year, just a little bit about mixing together. Are you elevating the language of your media kit to really describe you guys as something that it is? Roundtables are an elegant event, but in the middle of it, there's kind of like binding language about, no sales pitches permitted. I understand it, and it's actually true, but really does it excite them about what's going on in this particular channel? Okay, so that's another one. Words matter. Just pay attention to what you say and ask, is it consistent with what you're trying to present? Okay? Here's another one that I see a lot of is the word products. Everybody's got products. Everyone knows you have products. You've had products, tons of them. It is the stuff that you create. And yes, some of it is standard, a lot of it is standard, but some of it is custom. And the presentation of these products, again, I'm not saying that it's not factually right, but if I'm advertising with you, I'm really thinking more about how can I achieve whatever business result that I'm looking for to get response and engagement from the people within your audience, to get them to do the action that I want them to do. The products are merely a delivery mechanism for that strategy, but a lot of you guys have them focused out front as if they're the end-all, like my magazine or my event is the end-all. It really is just a mechanism for what they're trying to get to, which is access to your audience. I like it when, these are our friends at NAPCO, I like it when you see representations of products and services in the context of an issue. So again, they offer, consulting services or marketing solutions, asking you in the context of, are you short on marketing resources? Let me help. Right, so they're talking specifically within their kit. It's almost like you said, like a sales pitch. A lot of you are looking for it as a positioning statement to describe to an advertiser the types of problems that you solve, and then you have products and services underneath that. So, again, do you need high-quality videos? Hey, is that something that you as a business need? Well, we as a media company provide that level of service. So, again, just ask yourself when you look through and you are talking about your products themselves, and it is necessary to highlight them, but there always has to be a context of why you have products, which is to help the advertiser get to the audience that they desire. I love this word, again, I'll go back to TMB. I love this little representation is kind of new, where we're starting to see more language around engagement. You're seeing new words in here. Firmographics, engagement. It's not just qualified, it's engaged. Yes, there's demographics and geographic. We have engagement to this data. So again, these are words that change the narrative, because if you're going to use this as a talking point and the salesperson is going to reference back to the media kit, like many of you contemplate, you want it to be consistent with the way you're selling. So a lot of you are selling engagement, you're selling analytics, you're selling targeting, so just make sure that the media kit supports that. Okay, speaking of size and targeting, I know this is tricky because in a one-dimensional media like print or a PDF or a website where you're not having engagement, everybody wants to sound like they've got the biggest audience. That's one of the trickiest parts of this is the confidence of taking a big list. If you have the biggest list, or you're the #1 book, or you've got the #1 brand, the tendency to want to highlight that is very compelling. But if you really think about what your advertisers are asking and what your salesperson is leading with, many times it's not the biggest list, it's more your ability to do targeting and segmentation. So when you say you can get to the largest list, I would ask yourself, so what? So in addition to the fact that we have the largest list, maybe we also have the ability to personalize or to customize, because if you're going to get into a numbers game, once you start getting in the numbers game, the next guy can come along with bigger numbers. Even if it's marginally true or of lower quality, you're again in a defensive position. So I'm not saying you don't have to have numbers in there, represent the size of your audience, but if I were doing it, I would always recommend that there's a companion to it, which is your ability to get within that big list down to the specific pieces that they want. Again, we talked about blast. Those are big words. It's big, most, how much we can do. But really, instead, I think you're starting to see more of a trend within the context about targeting. So Brief Media is a great client of ours out of Tulsa. They focus in veterinary, cool products, cool ideas, great brands, and they're really focused on this quality, targeting, and efficiency of an engaged audience. In their case, you can kind of see at the bottom, they even introduced the idea of honing in on topic of interest. So it's not just that they have a large audience, it's not even that it's highly qualified, but it also has a behavioral component to find targeting opportunities for advertisers specific to topic of interest. These are the kinds of things that people are looking for these days, and again, the Media Kit is a representation of that, especially if your salesperson is selling it. North Star, I love Joe and the team up there. They're kind of, to me, the gold standard of how they do a lot of this stuff. And they talk about targeting and how using their integrated audience allows them to do conversion funnels and multi-step customer acquisition programs and focusing in and targeting. I mean, that's the sexy stuff that goes on right now within the way they sell that you can represent in the Media Kit, not just that you have the largest audience, but you have a unique way of honing in on and targeting them. So again, ask yourself on your Media Kit, yes, it's fine to have the largest audience, but I would always have a companion to make sure I made it clear the unique and clever ways that you can segment down to the right people. Okay, this one's a quick one. A couple of you guys said it on the responses, and I would, again, caution you to think about this. Most people, as you guys know, when they read content, they're generally looking at that content for a purpose. Meaning, if I read an article in People magazine, I'm probably reading it for entertainment. If I'm reading an article on, a technical B2B magazine, I'm probably looking at it for education purposes. A lot of you guys have these monolithic media kits, and they have multiple different use cases for them. So the front half of it might be a lead-in piece, but then buried somewhere in there, might be a branding messaging, but then it seems to, and I get it, I understand why you're doing it, but in the middle of it, it'll have like a style guide. Like, okay, so if you're going to run these really impactful ads, make sure it's 60K or less with SWF, GIF, or JPEG. I mean, I understand the technical manual of it, but the challenge is creating a single document with mixed purposes is sometimes can be less impactful. What I see differently are people kind of breaking these out into different segments instead of having them within one one single kit. Maybe it's like, here's the specifications section, or the, a specifications insert. Here's a pricing insert that maybe is separated. Here's the core overall value proposition. So even if you want all the content of a traditional full-fledged media kit that has a mixed purpose, just be careful, I think, to mix them, because again, in this very compelling, entertaining, and elevated media kit, it's like, here's our ad sizes. It just kind of, I get that it's truthful and it's factual and people need it, but I would really question whether or not a mixed use case document like this is the most effective way to do it. So just check your purpose and decide whether it's truly necessary or better off breaking it into different parts. Okay, so again, another thing that I saw differently, and again, that Facebook made me think of this, is just the results piece of it. A lot of you, and I understand why, are cautious to put down results because what's going to happen is you're going to get held accountable to them. It is tricky to say, oh, we did such and such for this great company, and they had 27% open rate and 400 leads, and it was wonderful. Well, the problem is the guy that buys then expects that level of performance. So I get that it's a tricky area, but a lot of the media kits I saw were extremely missing. They were literally almost devoid of any specific expected outcomes. So even if you don't want to get into the specifics of the numbers, if you don't feel comfortable with it, you should at least still think about, on the buyer side, the outcomes that they can expect in terms of process. Like, hey, we approach our lead program in a unique way where we focus on the conversion funnel. We've come up with different programs. We're focused on a results-based marketing, not just product-centric. So even if you're nervous about showing specific numbers, you should at least be thinking about expected outcomes. You go on Facebook, if you look on Facebook for Business and you look at the way they pitch it, they're like, here's our real businesses with real results. Dog Vacay, which I actually use, oddly, and a couple of these other ones. If you look at it, they have these use cases, and if you click on them, it says, here's the profile of the results we expect. 11% lift in brand awareness, 7% in growth, 54% reach, 7 cents per view. I mean, these are compelling statistics that the next guy might hold you accountable for. But on the flip side, I think some people are so averse to putting out anything that they end up with no results. So again, I would ask you to revisit, do you have a good representative examples within your media kit that can hold out over the course of a year, or if it's online, you can change out to give people different visual representations of your results. Okay, again, another one of our clients, I don't like that they use the word e-blast, but they do talk about deliverability, open rates, some other statistics about, the performance of things within the campaign. This is something that we strive for and expect. And again, you have to nuance it with making it a commitment, but at least it's visible to your advertiser of what they can expect. Okay, so I wrap up. I want to kind of show you what I think is a good example. Our friends up in New York, they're not a client of ours, but I still appreciate what they've done here, is the folks at Gen. It's a group within Marianne Lieber. They have a really cool interactive media kit. It kind of comes off their website. It's got some sex appeal to it. It's got like a nice graphics to it. It talks about, their exposure. It's got some website metrics, but it's done within the context of performance. They use tons of multimedia, so you go on, it'll show, kind of take the traditional media kit itself and maybe break it out. So instead of just saying our newsletters are great in print, just make a video about it, or just add a little snippet of technology that explains about the website and the advertising opportunity, and the newsletters and what constitutes them, or their ability to do data segmentation. So they have use the assets that you have and require people to come out and actually watch them and engage them before getting broader access to some of the media kit content that they want. Because again, guys, if you're going to show your hand with pricing, let's just use that most specific example. If you're going to show pricing, you have to at least have some form of preliminary value proposition to explain the context of your pricing, or else you have no basis for argument. You're going to simply start with pricing negotiation because you have not valued or explained the value of what you do. So by forcing a path that has multimedia engagement or request for information or some kind of gating or whatever that mechanism might be, you've at least provided yourself an opportunity to have some value statements before you jump right to pricing. I mean, how many of you have looked at a proposal in your personal life and immediately jump to the price? You know, you don't want that to happen in a media kit, because then you're really negotiating backwards, explaining why the value is created. Okay, I love this visual. Again, they talk about in their kit the language of sales, a customer sales cycle. They applied their products. This is a brilliant picture. They've applied their products, which we all talk about, that we have, to a portion of the funnel and evaluation and customer sales cycle. So I talk about how my magazine supports awareness. So I'm defending print, if you want to go down that path, to be a necessary tool for the awareness process. But when we get further down the funnel, we may focus on a different product set that can help us convert. So we're simultaneously making the case by saying, hey, you know, if you want broad visibility and awareness on your product, you need to be in our magazines, on our web banners, and our newsletters. If you're really focused on the conversion side, we can do more custom stuff. We can have a webinar specific to you with a targeted list. We can do ebooks and more content. So this is elegantly brilliant, and an application of how you combine product with customer outcome. I love this piece, you know, I saw a lot of this where you're representing your team. You know, I think it's personalized. You're showing who the assets are at your business. Again, they're a little bit cautious about showing numbers, okay, but they still work in some quotes. You know, it's forthcoming. You know, they have some quotes from some industry people. They're representing kind of references of people that maybe recognize brands or advertisers. So even if they're a little cautious, like I said before, about showing, you know, 37% return, or this cost for this, or this cost for that, even if you're hesitant to do that, this is a good compromise where it talks about, you know, we've had great results, or you know, we've used them in some particular manner. So I think this is a nice compromise for that if you want to go down that path. I like how they have some visuals around social. So here's a good example where they're using some numbers. Again, we're not shying away from numbers. We're just making sure they're in the context of a broader strategy, or that people understand that there's some context around them. If I've established to you prior why I might use these channels, then the numbers themselves are just a mechanism to validate what our previous strategy is. As opposed to leading with the numbers, you're actually using them as a defining mechanism for how to get at their strategy. I like this piece. I think this is kind of a cool idea. You know, instead of talking about blasting, which, you know, they're using still a little bit of a legacy word in list rental, but it still talks about going beyond, you know, tailoring a list to suit your needs. Looking at using stylized messaging to hand-pick segments. I mean, that's beautiful, right? It really talks about themselves as being different, as instead of just blasting, they're using targeting by not job function, by technologies, by whatever it might be. So it's kind of a cool way of presenting the same idea, but with a little bit of a different bent to it. Mobile, same thing. They've got some cool visual representations. Again, just talking about different ways of doing it. Anytime there's an image, there's some context around it. There's a little story about why it's important, why is it something that you need to do, giving people context around not just the data, giving context around the data, but also in this case around the channel. Okay, so you know, my goal with you guys today is really for you to get some foundational ideas, to give yourself a benchmark or some ideas to challenge conventional thinking that you may have about how you do it. So here's a couple of things you can walk away with. Number one, just make sure when you're doing a media kit that you understand the purpose before you create it. You know, again, is it, you know, 55% of you said it had to do with using it as a sales foundation, which is great. Then just make sure that the salespeople agree with it, that you've talked about how you're going to position it, when you want to introduce it, whether there's gating, and how it might be. So again, if you're going to have a strategic sales conversation, I would really be cautious that the media kit is purely the only way to do it, okay? Because it's one-dimensional, and if you send it out to a very high-profile client, and now you're going to draw yourself into that, you're really focused on your product, services, and rates, not something that is a broader strategic conversation. So I would say that's probably number two. Don't, in a really strategic conversation, just be careful how you use it. When it comes to pricing, just be thoughtful about it. Everybody, there's not one magic way to do it. Again, 7% of you said that there's no prices anymore. I suspect if we do this next year, talk about some new ideas in this, that'll be a higher number. But you really have to think about, maybe you keep it in, but maybe you have it as a downloadable supplement. Maybe it's a secondary thing that you can ask for. Maybe it's something that's more customized, if you will, just based on things. So there's a lot of different things to do. It just, the main point is that you're thoughtful about it. Next is just make sure you leverage all your media assets. I showed you that Gen website. Don't just do the standard PDF that somebody can download. Make sure, if possible, you use video, you use your website, you use other workflows. You know, there's a lot more things that you can use other than just your standard downloadable PDF. And lastly, just make sure when you're representing your company, as a lot of you said that you want to do, it's more than just the products and subscribers. Represent your audience, if that's the world you're in, as something more. It's something more than just the numbers underneath it and the attributes of those people. Okay, so hopefully this has been useful for you guys. You can pick up some nuggets. Again, you'll be able to get a copy and recording of this, as well as download the Media Kit, tip sheet. Again, what I want you guys to do, if you're interested in reevaluating your Media Kit, take a look at last year's kit, pull out these questions, and ask yourself, are we doing these things? Are we doing the right things? Are we dusting off our kit or just mailing it in, or are we actually trying to revisit it? I appreciate it. I'm out of time. There's a couple of questions that were asked around this. I'll answer them privately. I'll just send you guys a response to it, but I really, really appreciate you guys' engagement. And best of luck with everything. If you want to bounce any ideas off, let me know anytime. Good luck, everybody. We'll talk to you guys again soon.